Hey chatters. In this video, I'm going to be walking you through how to actually build out your Obsidian plugin by walking you through one that I've created based on the idea that I want to be able to easily use AI to revise text in my Obsidian vault. Before we get started though, do make sure that you have Node.js downloaded. Just Google download Node.js should lead you around here. And then also just make sure you have VS Code or whatever code editor you're using. So once you have that, let's head over to our project and get started. I am assuming you already know how to navigate through VS Code or whatever code editor you're using. You just want to make sure, again, that you're setting up your GitHub. You can look at another video I have for that. And then you've gone through already to this point, you've mapped out what your structure is going to be, what the files are, and maybe even started to input the code to those files that you've been writing with your favorite large language model. For this plugin, let me just walk through how I organized everything. So let's ignore everything outside for now and just focus on the source code. The first folder I set up is AI, and in here we have our base adapter. This is just going to try to abstract away everything that we're going to need to do to be able to call the large language models, so that if there's anything specific that a large language model needs in terms of how you make that call, that'll reside in its file, but everything else can reside in here. And you can see we've imported a lot of stuff up top from the Obsidian API like we've talked about. We have notice. What notice does is it can throw a little notice from Obsidian being like, this is what's happening. And the request URL response, this is so that it can send that HTTP request to the large language model to return back that text. I also created this models.ts. This is to make it easy in the future for me to add different providers and different models. So right now I just have LM Studio, which will be our local version, and Open Router, just because that gives you access to pretty much every model. I don't know. I don't know if I want to add everything right now, all the other providers. And then down here, I just list out every single one that I'm going to provide in a drop down later on in the plugin. So I have Claude IQ in here. I have Google. I have Mistral. I have OpenAI models, blah, blah, blah. And I can add more here. And I decided that I wanted to put both the max tokens and the context window so I can throw warnings if there's a problem you're running into, but also the input and output costs per token. It's a little iffy. It's going to be an estimation once I actually add in like how much everything costs, because the way Open Router at least runs thing is you're pulling from different providers of that model. So the costs could be different, but this will give you the ballpark for how much you're spending at least. And then any other information we need around the model. And then we have our specific adapters. So we have Open Router, like I said, and you can see down here, this is the specific stuff we're going to need. It requires this URL to send it to. It's got to be a post. The way they have the headers to essentially identify who you are, the system and user prompt, blah, blah, blah. And you'll see here that we have these config prompts. Now, this is important. You don't have to do it this way, but again, you want to abstract this away because no matter what model or thing you're using, it should more or less be using the same system and user prompt. System prompt being something general about you're an editor or whatever, and then the user prompt, which is whatever you're providing to the model in terms of what you want this revision to be. So let's actually zoom out and go to config. So I've created this config file to deal with that. For Open Router, we need a refer website. So I put that in there, and then the app name, at least for now. And then here's our system prompt that I've written out. You're a ghostwriter. Your responsibility is take my instructions and incorporate edits. And then we have the user, which is what you're going to be filling out later. I'll show you when we have the app up, but it's going to have your instructions and then the selected text that it's going to send along to the LLM to come back with your revisions. Next up, I have a settings file. You might do this differently depending on how large your actual plugin is, but I feel like I'll keep the settings stuff together. So the settings service, which we could also just call settings.ts, but I call it service here because this is what's going to be running, setting the defaults, making the calls, whatever. The setting tab is the actual user interface. So again, you can put it in UI if you want, but just wanted to keep everything together. And you can see here, we're pulling a few things in from Obsidian, including notice what we talked about, the settings options in the API, the settings tab. We're pulling in things like the AI provider and model, because we're going to want that to be in the settings, right? Like I want to be able to choose what model I'm going to use and from what provider. And then there's just the information on how it's going to look in the settings, which again, I'll get to, but just go to any Obsidian settings. Like that is organized a specific way. That's all we're doing here. We're creating the setting, for example, AI provider, select the AI provider you want to use. It's going to be a drop down. It's pulling that AI provider from our AI models file, which we've imported up here. So it's going to take the information, organize it how I want. You might, when you're setting up your settings, actually maybe draw it out for yourself using the components like drop downs, text area, a modal, whatever it might be, and feed that to the LM if you're having trouble thinking through how it might be organized, like just through text, right? You can show it an image. And then last up before we get to the orchestration part is our result modal and revision modal. So revision modal, this is where we're going to be putting in the actual revision. So we're going to have a modal pop up. Let me actually zoom up here. You'll see I've pulled in the modal functionality from Obsidian, so I don't have to build my own. I've brought in the text area component and a drop-down component because I'm going to need all these things. And you can see here, it's putting it for what it should be looking for and how it should organize things. So the modal pops up, it's going to say revise text with a heading 2. And then it's going to ask you, how do you want this text to be revived, and enter your instructions. And then you can choose your model and the temperature as well. We'll have that default, whatever you put in the settings, but you should be able, depending on what you need, I think, to change the temperature and the model. And then we have the result modal. So this is a window that's now going to pop up to say, okay, here is the text I've come back with, and I want you to be able to edit it. I want you to be able to immediately apply it or retry or cancel. And I did want to have kind of a cost so you can keep track of that, make sure you're not going wild there. So this again is just mapping that out. What is this modal going to look like? And then last but not least is our main.ts. This is the orchestrator. So you can see it's pulled in pretty much every other file in here, and it's going to be telling it, how do you initialize, how do you start things up, and how's this thing going to work? It also typically includes your ribbon icon, which again is on the side of Obsidian, which will show you the toolbar more or less, where you can click on things quickly. We wanted to add to the command palette as well. So that's when you do Control P, it'll bring up the command palette and this will show up there. A context menu. So I also want you to be able to right click on the highlighted text and be able to revise it that way. And then orchestrating everything else that I talked about, the AI model, max words, any errors we might have. And I have a test connection here just to make sure your connection works. The last couple things we'll go through is the styles.css. This is just how everything's going to look. I try not to get too complicated with this. I'm not a big fan of CSS. I have trouble with it. Don't go over the top too much, but you do want to keep all of your styling just in this one file. It's best practices for Obsidian. You don't want to be putting, for example, more or less the same styling in each of these revision modals, because then you're just duplicating yourself. So instead, you're essentially going to call in the styles to wherever you are, and you're going to have them in here all neatly organized with nice little comments. So we're going to end this video by actually building the plugin. And then in the next video, I'm going to show you how do you actually get this into your Obsidian without putting it up for the plugin store. So all we got to do is we come back down to our terminal. Again, you can, Alexa, just to show you, you can either do Control Shift squiggly in your top left, or you can come up here, go to terminal and new terminal. And then just want to type in npm run build. And we're going to hit enter. It can take a second. And obviously I've gone through all the errors. I know this is going to work. So that was quick, but you can see that it has completed. It didn't throw any errors to me. And it created this main.js, which we're going to go over in the next video. I highly recommend at this point, you actually come up with your idea, you structure this out, you work with the LM through all the errors, you get everything neatly organized the way you want, and then your other files set up. and try to see if you can get it to actually build. And then we'll figure out how we can get this into a test vault to start seeing how it works, how it looks, and how we might want to make some changes. Thanks, chatters.